The boardroom door clicked shut just as my fingertips grazed the handle. Through the frosted glass, I could see 7 silhouettes settling into chairs around that polished conference table. My conference table. The one where I'd presented my prototype 18 months ago, my voice trembling with excitement as I showed them what 3 years of 18-hour days in my garage had created. "Oh, Kira." The voice behind me belonged to Broderick Hayes, the VP of Strategic Development. His tone carried that particular brand of corporate condescension that makes your skin crawl. "Sorry, but this is C-suite only. We're handling the client presentation internally." I turned around slowly, keeping my expression neutral even though something was dying inside my chest. "Of course," I said, forcing what I hoped looked like understanding. "I'll wait outside." The thing is, I'd built that technology from the ground up. Every algorithm, every interface, every breakthrough that made our system 30% faster than anything else on the market, that was me. When they acquired my startup for what seemed like life-changing money back then, I stayed on as what they called a senior consultant, a deliberately vague title that let me work in the shadows while they paraded around in suits, taking credit for innovation they couldn't even properly explain. But this wasn't just any client meeting. The $50 million contract they were about to discuss belonged to Elias Morton, the original investor who'd believed in my vision when everyone else called it impossible. The man who'd sat in my cramped garage office, drinking terrible coffee from mismatched mugs, while I walked him through wireframes sketched on napkins. "My name is Kira Thorne. I'm 28 years old, and until that moment, I thought I could stomach anything for the sake of financial security. I was wrong." Let me pause here for a moment. Before I go any further, could you take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're watching from? Because I want to know how far my story has reached people who might be going through something similar. And please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this one. Because what I'm about to tell you changed everything for me. And maybe it can help you too. The hallway felt endless as I walked away from that boardroom. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing like a countdown. I could hear muffled voices starting the presentation through the walls. They were using my slides, my research, my 3 years of failed experiments and breakthrough moments. They were selling my dreams to the one person who'd helped me build them. I made it to my office, a cramped space tucked away in the corner of the building, nothing like the windowed offices the executives occupied. I sat down at my desk and stared at the single photo I kept there. Me and my dad in his workshop when I was 12, both of us covered in grease, grinning over some broken engine we'd managed to fix together. He died before he could see what I'd built, but he always told me that the best revenge against people who underestimate you isn't proving them wrong, it's proving them irrelevant. For the first time in 18 months, I wasn't thinking about keeping my head down or playing it safe. I was thinking about that clause buried deep in my acquisition contract. The one my lawyer had insisted on, even when I thought it was unnecessary. The clause that said if I ever felt the company was misrepresenting or misusing my technology, I retained certain rights. The presentation lasted 2 hours. I know because I watched every executive file out of that boardroom with smug satisfaction written across their faces. Broderick even had the audacity to give me a thumbs up as he passed my office, like I should be grateful to have witnessed their success from the sidelines. That night, I went home to my apartment and pulled out a box I hadn't touched since the acquisition. Inside were all my original notebooks, prototype sketches, and correspondence with Elias from those early days. Every late-night brainstorming session we'd had was documented in handwritten notes and email chains. Every breakthrough moment was time-stamped and signed by both of us. But more importantly, I still had his personal phone number. I called him at 11 p.m., not through corporate channels, not through intermediaries, but direct. The way we used to talk when I was just a woman with an impossible idea and he was the only investor crazy enough to listen. "Kira?" His voice was surprised but warm. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. The presentation today was impressive, though I have to say, something felt off about it." My heart started racing. "What do you mean?" "Well," he paused, and I could picture him in his home office, probably wearing one of those worn sweaters he favored for evening calls. The team seemed to struggle with some of the technical details. When I asked about the original inspiration for the core algorithm, they gave me a lot of corporate speak, but no real story. You know how much I value understanding the human element behind innovation. This was it. This was the opening I needed, but I had to be careful. I couldn't sound bitter or vindictive. I had to sound professional, concerned, and most importantly, truthful. Elias, I said slowly, can I ask you something? Do you remember our conversation about intellectual integrity? The one we had in my garage about how the technology industry has a problem with people taking credit for work they didn't do? The silence on the other end stretched just long enough to make me nervous. I remember, he said finally. Kira, are you telling me something I need to know? Over the next hour, I walked him through everything, not with anger or accusations, but with documentation. I sent him photos of my original sketches, timestamps from my development logs, email chains between us from the early days. I showed him the acquisition contract clause about misrepresentation. I let the evidence speak for itself. The most beautiful part was that I didn't have to convince him of anything. He remembered our conversations, our collaborative development process, the way I could answer technical questions that stumped even my own hired developers. He'd always known the technology was mine, but he'd assumed the company was properly crediting me as the architect. Kira, he said when I finished, I want you to know that if this is accurate, and based on what I remember, I believe it is, then I cannot in good conscience proceed with this contract. More than that, I think we need to have a very different conversation about the future. What kind of conversation? The kind where I ask if you'd be interested in starting fresh, with proper funding, proper ownership, and proper recognition for your work. I've been looking for someone with your vision to lead a new initiative I've been planning. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. From possibility. I'd like to hear more about that. How about we meet tomorrow? Not in a corporate boardroom, but somewhere we can actually talk. I'll bring my development team leaders, the ones who handle technical due diligence. I want them to hear directly from the source about what makes this technology revolutionary. After we hung up, I sat in my living room for hours, staring at the city lights through my window. For the first time since the acquisition, I felt like myself again. Not like a consultant or an advisor or someone grateful for the opportunity to watch other people present her work. Like an innovator. Like someone with value that couldn't be replaced or replicated. The next morning, I arrived at work early. I needed to prepare for what was coming, but I also needed to gather additional evidence. I printed copies of every email, every development log, every timestamp that proved the timeline of my innovations. I documented every meeting where my ideas had been discussed, every presentation where my work had been featured without my name attached. Around 10 a.m., Broderick stopped by my office. He was practically glowing with self-satisfaction. Great news, Kira, he said, leaning against my doorframe like we were old friends. The client is moving forward with preliminary discussions. The team really knocked it out of the park yesterday. That's wonderful, I replied, keeping my voice level. I'm sure everyone worked very hard to make it successful. They did. You know, moments like these really show the value of having strong leadership to guide complex client relationships. It takes experience to handle deals of this magnitude. I nodded thoughtfully. Absolutely. Experience and credibility are everything in these situations. He left my office looking pleased with himself, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. At noon, my phone rang. It was Elias. Kira, I've made my decision. I'm withdrawing from negotiations with your current company immediately. Their representation of the technology was misleading at best, and I won't work with organizations that misappropriate intellectual contributions. I understand, I said, though my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own voice. But I have a proposition for you. I want to fund your new company, your technology, your leadership, your vision. I'm prepared to offer you initial funding of $15 million, with the potential for significantly more as you scale. You'd maintain majority ownership and complete creative control. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Elias, I don't know what to say. Say yes. Then say goodbye to people who don't value what you've built. Yes, I whispered. Absolutely yes. Excellent. I'm sending formal withdrawal documentation to your current company this afternoon. I expect they'll want to schedule some emergency meetings to discuss what went wrong. What went wrong? As if it was some mysterious corporate puzzle, instead of the predictable consequence of excluding the actual creator from discussions about her own work. Within an hour, the entire executive floor was in chaos. I could hear urgent conversations happening behind closed doors, phones ringing constantly, assistants hurrying between offices with stacks of papers. The $50 million deal that had seemed like a guaranteed win that morning was evaporating in real time. Broderick appeared in my doorway again, but this time his expression was completely different. The smugness was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. Kira, he said, stepping fully into my office and closing the door behind him. We need to talk. There seems to be some kind of misunderstanding with the Morton Group. They're claiming there were misrepresentations in our presentation. That sounds serious, I said, turning away from my computer to face him directly. What kind of misrepresentations? They're asking questions about the original development team, the timeline of innovations, things like that. Very technical details that seem, I don't know, unnecessarily specific. I watched him struggle to find words that wouldn't admit what we both knew was true. Maybe they want to understand the technology better, I suggested. Some clients appreciate knowing the full story behind the innovations they're investing in. His face flushed slightly. Right. Well, the thing is, you were obviously very involved in the early development process. If they want to speak with someone who has that historical perspective, you might be the right person to have a conversation with them. Finally, after 18 months of being relegated to the shadows, they needed me front and center. I'd be happy to help, I said carefully, though I should mention that Elias Morton and I actually have quite a bit of history together. He was my original investor before the acquisition. The color drained from Broderick's face so quickly, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Your original investor? Oh yes. We worked together extensively during the early development phases. Very hands-on relationship. He's quite familiar with my role in creating the technology. Broderick left my office without another word. The afternoon brought a parade of executives to my door, each one more desperate than the last. First came Camille Sterling, the chief technology officer who'd never written a line of code in her life. Then Fletcher Morris, the VP of Innovation, who couldn't explain how innovation actually happened. One by one, they came to ask for my help in salvaging a deal that was falling apart because they'd excluded the one person who could actually answer the client's questions. But it was too late. By 5 p.m., Elias had sent formal documentation to the company's legal department, officially withdrawing from all negotiations and citing concerns about intellectual property misrepresentation. The letter specifically requested clarification about the original development team and asked for detailed documentation of each team member's contributions to the core technology. The executives had built their careers on taking credit for work they didn't understand, and now someone was asking them to prove their expertise. At 6 p.m., I submitted my resignation letter. Short, professional, and effective immediately. At 6:30, I walked out of that building for the last time, carrying nothing but my personal belongings and the satisfaction of knowing that everything was about to change. The phone calls started that evening. First Broderick, then Camille, then Fletcher. All of them wanting to discuss my departure and explore options for moving forward. All of them suddenly very interested in acknowledging my contributions and finding ways to properly credit my work. Too little, too late. The next morning, I woke up as the majority owner of a fully funded technology company with the backing of one of the most respected investors in the industry. The morning after that, I read in the business news that 7 executives from my former company had submitted their resignations following the collapse of their largest potential contract. The most beautiful part was that I never had to destroy them. I just had to let the truth surface. When someone asks you to prove you created something, and you can't, the conversation tends to end pretty quickly. The resignations made headlines in the tech industry. Not because of who these people were individually, but because 7 C-suite executives leaving the same company within 72 hours suggested something catastrophic had happened behind closed doors. I found out the details from Jasmine, my former cubicle neighbor who'd always been kind to me. She called me 3 days after I'd walked out, her voice barely above a whisper. "Kira, what did you do?" she asked, but she wasn't accusatory. She sounded amazed. "I told the truth," I said. "That's all." Well, the truth just demolished the entire leadership structure. They called an emergency board meeting yesterday. Apparently, when Elias Morton withdrew from the deal, he didn't just leave quietly. He sent a detailed report to the board of directors explaining exactly why he couldn't work with a company that misrepresented intellectual property. My stomach fluttered, but not with anxiety this time, with vindication. Jasmine continued. The board demanded documentation proving who actually developed the core technology. When the executives couldn't provide it, they started pointing fingers at each other. Broderick threw Camille under the bus, saying she should have known the technical details. Camille blamed Fletcher for not maintaining proper development records. Fletcher claimed it was everyone else's responsibility to verify the information before client presentations. And none of them could actually explain how the technology worked, I said. Exactly. The board brought in independent technical reviewers to assess the situation. Guess whose name appeared on every single patent application, every development milestone, every breakthrough documentation? Mine. Because I'd been meticulous about documentation, even when I thought no one would ever need to verify my contributions. The board gave them a choice, Jasmine said. Resign quietly, or face a public investigation into intellectual property fraud. They all chose resignation. After that call, I sat in my new office, a bright windowed space in a building I'd chosen specifically because it felt nothing like my old workplace, and tried to process what had happened. 7 people who'd made my life miserable for 18 months had essentially erased themselves from my professional landscape. Not because I'd schemed or manipulated or destroyed them, but because they'd built their careers on a foundation that couldn't withstand basic scrutiny. The irony was staggering. They'd excluded me from the meeting because they thought I wasn't important enough to be there. But excluding the actual creator of the technology from discussions about that technology had exposed the fact that none of them understood what they were selling. My new company launched 6 weeks later. Elias had introduced me to a team of brilliant developers who actually wanted to understand my vision instead of just profiting from it. We called the company Apex Innovations, simple, direct, and completely owned by me. The first major client meeting was surreal. I sat at the head of a conference table in my own building, presenting technology I'd created to people who respected my expertise. When technical questions arose, I answered them myself instead of watching someone else stumble through explanations they didn't comprehend. But the real validation came 4 months later, when Elias brought me an opportunity that made my original $50 million deal look modest. "Kira," he said during one of our weekly strategy meetings, "I've been talking with some contacts in the aerospace industry. They're looking for exactly the kind of innovative approach you've developed, but they need someone who can scale it for much larger applications." "How much larger?" $200 million contract to start. Potential for expansion into international markets worth significantly more. I stared at him across the table, remembering all those months when I'd felt grateful just to have a job where I could work with my own technology. "What's the timeline?" I asked. "They want to meet with you next month, just you. They specifically requested to work directly with the original innovator." The meeting took place in a conference room that overlooked the city skyline. As I presented my expanded vision for the technology, I kept thinking about that closed boardroom door from almost a year earlier. The click of that handle turning, the dismissive voice telling me I wasn't important enough to be included. This time, I was the only person in the room they wanted to hear from. The aerospace executives signed the contract that afternoon. 6 months later, my former company was acquired by a larger corporation for significantly less than its projected value. The loss of the Morton Group deal had triggered a cascade of problems, including investor confidence issues and client trust concerns. The business news articles mentioned that the company had experienced leadership instability and questions about intellectual property management. I learned about the acquisition from a LinkedIn notification. Several former colleagues had reached out to congratulate me on my new company's success, mentioning that they were looking for new opportunities since the acquisition meant layoffs were likely. But it was a message from an unexpected source that really caught my attention. Broderick Hayes had sent me a connection request with a personal note. Kira, I hope we can put the past behind us. I've learned a lot about the importance of proper attribution and would love to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. I stared at the message for a long time. This man had spent 18 months treating me like an inconvenient afterthought, had smirked when I was excluded from presenting my own work, had taken credit for innovations he couldn't even explain. Now he wanted to collaborate. I declined the connection request without responding. Some people think revenge means making your enemies suffer, but the most satisfying revenge is becoming so successful that your enemies become irrelevant. Broderick wasn't my problem anymore. He was just someone I used to work with who'd made some poor choices. My company now employs 43 people, all of them properly credited for their contributions. We have contracts worth over $600 million, and 3 of our innovations have been licensed by companies in 12 different countries. I own 78% of a business that industry analysts value at nearly $500 million. More importantly, I wake up every morning excited about the work I'm doing instead of dreading another day of watching other people present my ideas. The technology that started in my garage has evolved into something I never could have imagined. We're developing applications for renewable energy, medical devices, and space exploration. Last month, I gave a keynote speech at the International Innovation Conference, where I talked about the importance of intellectual integrity and supporting original thinkers. After my presentation, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. She told me she'd been working at a company where her male colleagues consistently took credit for her research, and she'd been considering leaving the field entirely. Your story gave me hope, she said. It showed me that the truth has power, even when it takes time to surface. I gave her my contact information and told her about the mentorship program we'd started at Apex Innovations. 3 months later, she joined our team as a research director. That's the thing about authentic success. It creates opportunities to lift other people up instead of just climbing over them. Sometimes I drive past my old office building. It's been mostly empty since the acquisition, with only a few departments remaining before the full consolidation happens. The parking lot where I used to sit in my car, psyching myself up for another day of invisibility, now has weeds growing through the asphalt cracks. But I don't feel vindictive when I see it. I feel grateful. Those 18 months of frustration and exclusion taught me exactly what kind of leader I didn't want to become. They showed me the difference between authority based on position and authority based on competence. Most importantly, they proved that you don't have to destroy people who underestimate you. You just have to build something so undeniably excellent that their opinions become meaningless. The last I heard, Broderick was working as a consultant for small tech startups, helping them optimize their leadership structures. Camille took a position at a mid-level company doing project management. Fletcher moved into sales, where his lack of technical knowledge was less of a liability. They all landed somewhere. That's the thing about the corporate world. There's always another position for people who are good at managing without creating. But there's only one person who can claim to have built what I built, and that person is me. Looking back, I realized that the moment they closed that boardroom door, they didn't just exclude me from a meeting. They freed me from the illusion that I needed their approval to succeed. They forced me to remember that I'd built something valuable, not because of their guidance, but in spite of their interference. The girl who spent 3 years in a garage, surviving on determination and terrible coffee, didn't need permission to be brilliant. She just needed the courage to stop asking for it. If you're watching this and you're in a situation where people are taking credit for your work, or excluding you from opportunities you've earned, or making you feel like you should be grateful just to be in the room, listen to me carefully. Your value doesn't decrease because someone fails to recognize it. Your contributions don't become less significant because someone else presents them. Document everything. Keep records. Maintain relationships with people who understand your actual capabilities. And never let anyone convince you that being overlooked is the same as being unimportant. The truth has a way of surfacing. especially in our connected world where intellectual property and original contributions can be verified. People who build careers on other people's work are building on sand. Eventually, someone's going to ask them to prove what they claim to know, and that's when their foundation crumbles. Your job isn't to destroy them. Your job is to build something so authentic and excellent that when that moment comes, you're ready to show the world what you're actually capable of. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you're building, what you're fighting for, or what truth you're ready to let surface. Subscribe for more stories about people who refuse to stay invisible, because these stories matter. They remind us that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they stop waiting for permission and start believing in their own value. The world needs what you've created. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The glass award for my drought-resistant garden design glinted in the sunlight streaming through the window as Bryce announced his nephew would take the design director position. My third rejection in 3 years. Sweat beaded along my hairline, not from the greenhouse heat, but from the volcanic rage threatening to erupt beneath my composed expression. Pierce has impressive credentials from his time at the University of Colorado, Bryce continued, avoiding my eyes. I gripped my soil-stained hands behind my back, knuckles whitening. Pierce sat smugly at the opposite end of the workbench, his pressed chinos still department store crisp, hands too clean to have touched actual soil in months. Yesterday, Mrs. Abernathy had stopped me in the parking lot to gush about how my native plant installation had attracted monarch butterflies for the first time in 20 years. Last week, the local news featured my water conservation garden design. 3 days ago, Bryce himself had mentioned my weekend workshops were bringing in record revenue. But there sat Pierce, 26 years old and primarily qualified by DNA. Merritt will continue leading our sustainability initiatives, Bryce added, throwing me the same bone he'd tossed after each previous rejection. My carefully curated smile didn't waver, though something vital inside me cracked. A sympathetic glance from Deb across the workbench almost undid me. I didn't need pity. I needed what I'd earned. The meeting concluded. Everyone scattered faster than birds when a hawk circles. Only Tori lingered, her mouth opening as if to offer comfort, then closing when she caught my expression. I stayed rooted until everyone departed, then walked with deliberate steps toward Bryce's office. Through the glass partition, I watched him hurriedly gather his things. My hand pushed the door open before he could escape. Why? The single word came out steadier than I felt. Bryce busied himself with papers. Pierce brings fresh perspective. His thesis on ornamental grasses was quite, I've generated more revenue for this garden center in 3 years than anyone in its history. My client waitlist is 4 months long. The Water Authority literally sends people here specifically requesting my designs. This isn't personal, Merritt. Tell me what more I could have done. His hesitation spoke volumes. Your approach is unconventional. Clients want reliability, not experiments. Experiments? The word tasted bitter. My designs save clients thousands in water bills and maintenance costs. They're not experimental. They're the future. Not everyone wants the future, Merritt. Some people prefer tradition. Tradition. Code for the chemical-heavy, water-wasting gardens that had been Pinewood Garden Center's bread and butter before I arrived. Gardens that generated ongoing maintenance contracts and repeated chemical sales. This is the 3rd time, Bryce. He finally looked at me, discomfort mixed with resolution. Perhaps your talents would be better appreciated elsewhere. The dismissal was clear. After 3 years, he was suggesting I leave rather than recognize my contributions. As I turned to go, I noticed Pierce peering through the office blinds, already measuring for new furniture. I walked out to my demonstration garden, relegated to the far corner of the nursery 3 seasons ago, and sat among the black-eyed Susans and purple coneflowers buzzing with bees. The native plant section I'd built from nothing had become the garden center's quirky corner, as Bryce called it. Never mind that this quirky corner had been featured in Gardening Monthly or that customers specifically came asking for that eco-garden lady. My phone buzzed with a calendar notification. The Governor's Mansion Landscape Initiative deadline was tomorrow. I'd nearly finished my design, but had hesitated to submit it. What was the point of another rejection? I plucked a spent bloom, rolling the stem between my fingers. 3 years of pushing against resistance had drained me. 3 years of watching my innovations attributed to others during client presentations. 3 years of being too ambitious, too vocal, to everything that threatened the comfortable order. Had this all been inevitable? From my first day, when I suggested replacing the chemical fertilizer display with organic alternatives, and Bryce laughed, calling me our little tree hugger? Or was it when my first drought-resistant installation for the public library received newspaper coverage, and suddenly my design folders began disappearing from the shared drive? The signs were everywhere if I had been willing to read them. The way certain clients were steered away from my consultation table, how Pierce or Truman would insert themselves into meetings with my high-profile clients, the mysterious rescheduling of my workshops to conflict with important garden shows. Merit? Deb approached cautiously, extending a cup of tea. You okay? Spectacular, I replied, accepting the cup. It's wrong. Everyone knows it. Yet no one says anything. Deb sighed. What can we do? Bryce owns the place. That was the truth that had kept me in check for 3 years. Bryce Pinewood was the third-generation owner of the largest garden center in the county. His word was final. I thought good work would be enough, I said quietly. It should be. We sat in silence until a customer approached, asking about butterfly plants. I stood automatically, professional smile in place, and began explaining the merits of milkweed. This was what I did. Educate, innovate, persevere. But for what? After closing, I lingered in the greenhouse, misting the seedlings I'd been nurturing for spring. Native columbines and salvias that most suppliers didn't bother with because they weren't showy enough for conventional gardens. My quiet rebellion. Still here? Pierce's voice startled me. He leaned against the doorframe, key ring twirling around his finger. Just finishing up. You know, I've always admired your passion. The pause suggested otherwise. Must be difficult, caring so much about plants that most people consider weeds. I continued misting. Native plants are the backbone of our ecosystem. Without them, save the lecture. I just wanted to say I hope there are no hard feelings about today. Uncle Bryce makes the decisions, and well, family is family. The spray bottle paused in my hand. Is that why you got the job? Family? His laugh held no humor. I got it because I understand what customers actually want, not what you think they should want. They want pretty gardens that impress neighbors, not science projects. My designs aren't. Look, Merritt, you're talented. Nobody denies that. But you're pushing too hard against tradition. This business ran successfully for 50 years before you arrived with your sustainability crusade, and it will fail in the next 20 if it doesn't adapt. Water restrictions are getting tighter every year. Chemical runoff regulations are coming. The future is sustainable gardening. Pierce sighed dramatically. This is exactly why Uncle Bryce couldn't promote you. You think you know better than everyone else. That kind of attitude disrupts a team. The truth hit like a thunderclap. It wasn't my designs they objected to. It was the threat those designs posed to their business model. Sustainable gardens needed fewer chemicals, less frequent maintenance, reduced water systems. My success threatened their profit streams. I get it now, I whispered. Good, so we can work together without tension. Pierce stepped closer. Actually, I'd appreciate your help with the West Side Municipal Project. Your plant knowledge would be useful, and I could put your name in the secondary credits. Secondary credits. After I'd written the initial proposal that won the bid. I'll think about it, I lied. After he left, I sat among the seedlings and made a decision. Opening my laptop, I pulled up the nearly completed design for the Governor's Mansion Initiative. The submission guidelines specified anonymous entries. No names, no company affiliations. Just designs judged on merit alone. For 3 hours, I refined every detail of my vision. Rainwater capture systems feeding native plant communities, pollinator corridors connecting discrete garden rooms, edible landscaping disguised as ornamental borders. Everything I believed in, everything I'd been told was too experimental, too ambitious, too much. If you're listening to this story and know what it's like to have your light dimmed by others, tap that like button. If you've ever had your ideas dismissed only to watch someone else take credit later, subscribe to hear more stories that might just give you the courage to shine anyway. I'd love to read your experiences in the comments. My name is Merritt Bloom, and gardening isn't just my profession, it's my language. Where others see empty spaces, I envision ecosystems. While classmates planned wedding dresses, I sketched native plant combinations that would support local bird populations. My parents hoped I'd grow out of spending every free moment volunteering at community gardens, but instead, I grew into someone who could identify 50 wildflower species before I could legally drive. I arrived at Pinewood Garden Center with a master's degree in sustainable landscape design and naive enthusiasm. Bryce hired me during a market downturn when traditional landscaping contracts had slowed. My pitch was simple. Eco-friendly designs could open new client demographics and prepare the business for increasingly strict water regulations. "We'll give your ideas a trial run," he'd said, "but our bread and butter is still traditional landscaping." That trial run turned into a waiting list of clients specifically requesting sustainable designs. What began as a curiosity became a significant revenue stream, one that Bryce acknowledged but never fully embraced. The existing design team watched my rise with growing unease. Truman Hansen, senior designer for 20 years, specialized in formal English gardens that required weekly maintenance and regular chemical treatments. Lucinda Wells created elaborate water features that, while beautiful, wasted thousands of gallons annually. Pierce, before his convenient promotion, mainly designed decorative borders featuring non-native annuals requiring replacement each season. My success threatened their expertise. Every water-efficient garden I installed meant fewer maintenance contracts. Every native plant garden reduced chemical sales. My workshops teaching homeowners to maintain their own eco-gardens undercut the center's service department. The resistance began subtly. Plants I'd specified for client installations would mysteriously be out of stock, forcing last-minute substitutions that compromised my designs. My demonstration garden was relocated 3 times, each move placing it further from customer traffic. Workshop materials would disappear hours before classes began. "Must have been a misunderstanding," Bryce would say when I raised concerns. Then came the client interference. Deb overheard Truman telling the Hendersons that my native plant design would attract pests and look weedy by August. When the Riverdale Community Center requested my drought-resistant design, Lucinda warned them it would appear brown and dead during summer months. Despite my portfolio showing vibrant summer gardens using appropriate native species, still, I persisted. I arrived early to propagate hard-to-find native plants myself. I created detailed maintenance guides for clients. I documented the water savings and biodiversity increases in my installed gardens. I built a loyal client base that specifically requested my services. But watching that third promotion go to Pierce, who once planted shade-loving hostas in full southwestern exposure, nearly broke me. 3 years of innovation, growth, and proven success counted less than familiar DNA. That night, after submitting my design to the Governor's Mansion Initiative, I sat on my apartment balcony, surrounded by rare seedlings I'd rescued from development sites. Native plants most people would never notice, yet each vital to some pollinator, bird, or soil microbe. Much like my contributions at work, essential but unrecognized by those in power. My phone pinged with a text from Deb. "Emergency planning meeting tomorrow. New chemical supplier presentation. Mandatory attendance." Another subtle message. The company was doubling down on traditional methods. My innovations would remain contained to my quirky corner. I watered my seedlings and made a decision. Whether or not my Governor's Mansion design won, it was time to plan my exit. 3 years of pushing against resistance had proven that Pinewood wouldn't change from within. Sleep came fitfully that night, my dreams filled with gardens that kept transforming into concrete whenever I turned my back. I woke exhausted but resolute. Today would be different. Today, I would begin looking toward my future, instead of fighting for recognition of my past. The mandatory meeting featured a representative from Chemgrow Industries, showcasing their new and improved line of pesticides and fertilizers. I sat silently while Bryce and the others nodded approvingly at promises of greener lawns with half the effort and complete pest elimination guaranteed. When the representative asked for questions, my hand rose before I could reconsider. "Have you conducted studies on how these chemicals affect pollinator populations?" The question landed like a stone in still water. The representative's smile flickered. "Our products are EPA approved for residential use. That wasn't my question. Do you have data on pollinator impact, soil microbiome effects, groundwater testing results?" Bryce cleared his throat. "Perhaps we can discuss those technical details after the presentation, Merritt." "These aren't technical details. They're fundamental considerations for any garden center claiming to care about environmental stewardship." The silence stretched uncomfortably until the representative launched into rehearsed talking points about balancing effectiveness with responsibility. I didn't push further. My point was made, though likely ignored. After the meeting, Bryce cornered me by the tool shed. That was inappropriate, Merritt. Asking about environmental impacts of products we sell is inappropriate. The manner in which you challenged our guest was unprofessional. I asked legitimate questions that any responsible garden center should consider. His jaw tightened. We've tolerated your perspective because it attracts a certain customer demographic, but don't mistake that for company policy. Pinewood has relationships with suppliers that predate your employment and will continue long after. The implied threat hung between us. I nodded once and walked away, his words echoing. After, he was already envisioning Pinewood without me. That afternoon, while helping a customer select plants for a butterfly garden, I noticed Pierce leading my consultation with the West Side Municipal Project team. The project I'd written the proposal for, the project that should have been mine. I watched from behind a display of ornamental grasses as Pierce gestured with my proposal in his hands, pointing to design elements I'd spent weekends perfecting. The municipal team nodded appreciatively while Pierce explained his vision for transforming the public space into a sustainable showcase. We'll incorporate native plant communities that reduce water usage by 60%, he said, using my exact words from the document. The project director smiled. That's exactly what we're looking for. The water conservation angle will help us secure additional funding. My hands trembled as I gripped a pot of switchgrass. Pierce hadn't just been given my promotion. He was now being handed my work, my ideas, my passion projects. The realization settled like a stone in my chest. This had been happening longer than I knew. That evening, I stayed late, using the office computer to search through old project files. There it was, evidence of my systematic erasure. My detailed plant lists for the library renovation, now under Truman's name. My rainwater capture system for the elementary school, credited to Lucinda. 3 years of innovation, appropriated and reassigned. I downloaded copies to my personal email, hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Not revenge, I told myself. Documentation. The greenhouse door squeaked open behind me. Working late again? Deb asked, setting down her purse. I forgot my keys. I closed the browser, just checking some plant availability. It is my 40, she hesitated. I heard about the municipal project. Pierce is presenting your proposal. Apparently. It's not right, Merritt. None of this is right, but it's how things work here. I powered down the computer. I'm beginning to understand that. Deb leaned against the counter. What will you do? Deb, the question hung between us. What could I do? Leave and start over somewhere else, where the same dynamics might play out again. Stay and continue watching my work benefit others? I'm considering my options, I said finally. 2 days later, the first anonymous finalist selections for the Governor's Mansion Initiative were announced. 10 designs had been chosen for further consideration, identified only by submission numbers. Design 347, submission, was among them. I kept the news to myself, a private victory in a week of public defeats. The anonymity of the contest meant my work would be judged solely on merit, not on office politics or personal connections. That afternoon, Bryce called an unexpected staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the main showroom, curiosity buzzing. Bryce stood beside a distinguished-looking woman I didn't recognize. This is Amara Reed, Director of the State Environmental Commission, Bryce announced, his voice unusually formal. She's here about an exciting opportunity for Pinewood. Amara stepped forward. Thank you for your time. As you may know, the Governor's Mansion is undergoing a complete landscape renovation, focusing on sustainability and native ecology. The initiative committee has selected 10 finalist designs, and we're visiting potential contractor firms to discuss implementation capabilities. My pulse quickened. They were considering Pinewood to implement one of the finalist designs, possibly mine. This is a prestigious project that would put the selected firm at the forefront of sustainable landscaping in our state, Imara continued. The governor is personally committed to making the mansion grounds a showcase for water conservation and habitat restoration. Bryce beamed. Pinewood Garden Center has been a leader in landscape design for over 50 years. We'd be honored to be considered. Excellent, Imara smiled. Now, I'd like to meet your sustainable landscape specialists. Who heads your eco-friendly design department? The room fell silent. Bryce's smile faltered as he glanced around, eventually looking at me. Merritt handles most of our sustainability initiatives, he said reluctantly. Perfect. I'd love to see your demonstration gardens and discuss your approach to native plant communities. I felt every eye in the room on me as I stepped forward. I'd be happy to show you our sustainable design area. As we walked toward my demonstration garden, Bryce and Pierce hurried to join us. Imara spoke directly to me. The committee was particularly impressed with finalist design 347, she said. The integration of rainwater management with pollinator corridors showed exceptional understanding of ecological principles. My heart pounded. She was describing my design. That sounds innovative, I replied carefully. It is, in fact, it's precisely the approach the governor hopes to implement. Does your team use similar techniques in your commercial designs? Before I could answer, Pierce stepped in. Absolutely. Our designs frequently incorporate those principles. I recently completed a municipal project using that exact approach. I bit my tongue as Pierce described his water conservation techniques, all taken directly from my proposal. Bryce nodded along, adding comments about Pinewood's commitment to sustainability. Imara listened politely, then turned back to me. And what's your perspective, Merritt? As the sustainability specialist, do you find your innovative approaches are well supported here? The question hung in the air like summer humidity before a storm. Bryce and Pierce watched me, tension visible in their postures. 3 years of diminishment, credit stealing, and rejection flashed through my mind. I believe in Pinewood's potential to lead in sustainable landscaping, I said carefully. My demonstration garden showcases what's possible when we prioritize ecological principles. We reached the native plant section, my section, tucked in the furthest corner of the nursery. Despite its location, the garden hummed with life. Bumblebees bounced between coneflowers, goldfinches plucked seeds from native grasses, and a monarch butterfly drifted lazily over the milkweed. You created this? Imara asked, watching a hummingbird dart between cardinal flowers. Yes. It demonstrates how native plants can create functioning ecosystems even in small spaces. She nodded appreciatively. It's remarkable how much biodiversity you've attracted. Exactly the approach the governor envisions. Pierce stepped forward. Merritt has been a valuable team member, but our comprehensive approach includes both traditional and sustainable methods. I'd be happy to show you some of my recent designs that blend both approaches. Imara held up her hand. Actually, I'd like to continue speaking with Merritt. Perhaps we could discuss her design philosophy privately? The look on Pierce's face was worth 3 years of frustration. Bryce forced a smile. Of course, we'll be in the main office when you're finished. Once they left, Imara's professional demeanor softened. Now, we can speak frankly. The committee was deeply impressed with Design 347. The anonymous submission process was specifically implemented to identify innovation regardless of firm size or designer reputation. My mouth went dry. That's an excellent approach. That's an excellent approach. It is, and it's yielded some surprising results. She studied me intently. The design shows remarkable attention to detail. The creator clearly understands both the science of ecosystems and the aesthetics needed for a high-profile installation. I nodded, uncertain how to respond without revealing myself. Tell me, Merritt, are your talents truly appreciated here at Pinewood? The directness of her question caught me off guard. Before I could formulate a diplomatic answer, Deb approached with a customer inquiry. I excused myself to answer a quick question about pollinator plants. When I returned, Imara was examining my hand-drawn plant community diagrams posted near the butterfly section. These are impressive, she said. The line quality and attention to plant interactions reminds me of, she paused, studying me, reminds me of the finalist design I mentioned. My chest tightened. She suspected or knew I was the designer. The governor isn't just looking for a design, Imara continued. He's looking for the right designer, someone who can articulate the vision, supervise the implementation, and educate the public about sustainable landscaping principles. That sounds like an incredible opportunity. It would be, particularly for someone whose talents might be underutilized in their current position. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text from Bryce. What's taking so long? Bring her to the office now. I pocketed my phone. It seems my boss is getting impatient. I imagine he is. Imara smiled knowingly. Before we join them, I should mention that the selection committee will announce the final design choice next week. The selected designer will be offered a state contract that includes both the mansion project and a role developing sustainability guidelines for all state properties. My heart raced at the possibility, a chance to implement my vision on a statewide scale, free from Pinewood's limitations. That would be a career-defining opportunity for any landscape designer, I said. Yes, particularly one whose innovations haven't been fully recognized. Imara handed me her business card. My direct number is on the back. I'd welcome a conversation about your career aspirations, regardless of the committee's final decision. As we walked toward the main office, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, someone with actual influence recognized my work, even suspected it was mine despite the anonymous submission. Bryce's office buzzed with nervous energy as we entered. He'd assembled the entire design team, portfolios open to their most impressive projects. Pierce stood front and center, ready to take command of the conversation. Mrs. Reed, we've prepared a presentation of our most innovative sustainable projects, Bryce began. That won't be necessary today, Imara replied smoothly. I've seen what I needed to see. The committee will make its final decision next week. But we haven't shown you our commercial portfolio, Pierce protested. My recent municipal project. I'm particularly interested in native plant integration and water conservation techniques, Imara interrupted. Based on what I've observed, I have a clear understanding of Pinewood's capabilities in those areas. Her eyes briefly met mine, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. Then she thanked Bryce for his time and departed, leaving a wake of confusion behind her. What exactly did you tell her? Bryce demanded once she was gone. I showed her my demonstration garden and answered her questions about native plants. I replied calmly. That's it? She spent 30 minutes with you to look at some weedy flowers? The dismissive comment stung, but I maintained my composure. She seemed particularly interested in ecological approaches to landscape design, which is exactly what my municipal project showcases, Pierce interjected. You should have brought her to see my portfolio. I met his gaze steadily. She specifically asked to see the native plant demonstration area. Bryce ran a hand through his hair. This is a major opportunity for Pinewood. If they select one of those finalist designs, we could be the firm implementing a high-profile state project. Imagine the publicity, Lucinda added. It would establish us as leaders in sustainable landscaping. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 3 years, they'd marginalized my sustainable approaches. Now they wanted to claim expertise in the very methods they'd dismissed. We need to present a united front next week, Bryce continued. Pierce will lead our presentation to the selection committee. Actually, I said quietly, I won't be available next Wednesday. I've scheduled a personal day. Bryce stared at me. Reschedule it. This is priority. I'm afraid I can't. It's a medical appointment I've waited 3 months to secure. The lie came easily, surprising me. I had no appointment, but I had no intention of watching Pierce present himself as Pinewood's sustainability expert to the committee that was considering my design. This is exactly the problem, Pierce muttered. No team perspective. I gathered my things without responding. As I headed toward the door, Bryce called after me. Merritt, we need to discuss your attitude. First thing tomorrow. I turned back. I look forward to it. That night, I sat on my balcony, reviewing the job descriptions I'd found online. 3 landscape firms in neighboring counties were seeking designers with sustainable expertise. 2 parks departments had posted environmental educator positions. The options weren't limitless, but they existed. My phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Design 347 has advanced to the final 3. Committee meeting Wednesday to make selection. Thought you might want to know. IR? I stared at the message from Imara Reed, my hands trembling with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. My design was in the final 3. By Wednesday, I would know if my vision for the governor's mansion had won, anonymously, on merit alone. The realization settled over me like the first warm day of spring. Regardless of the outcome, everything was about to change. Tuesday morning arrived with a message from Bryce. Meeting postponed. Working from home today. See you tomorrow. A convenient absence. I spent the day tending to customer needs and finalizing plant orders while dodging Pierce's repeated questions about my conversation with Imara. Each time he approached, I found a new customer requiring assistance or plants needing urgent attention. By closing time, an unfamiliar calm had settled over me. Tomorrow would bring the committee's decision, and regardless of the outcome, I had options. For the first time in 3 years, I felt the weight of Pinewood's limitations lifting from my shoulders. That evening, I spread my seed catalogs across my kitchen table and began drafting a business plan. If I was going to leave Pinewood, I needed clarity about my next steps. Native plant nursery, design consultancy, educational workshops. The possibilities energized me more than I'd felt in months. My phone rang shortly after 9. Deb's name flashed on the screen. "You need to come in early tomorrow," she said without preamble. "Something's happening." "What do you mean?" "Bryce called an emergency staff meeting for 7:30. Pierce has been making photocopies of your client notes and design sketches all afternoon." My stomach tightened. "Why?" "I don't know exactly, but I overheard him telling Truman they needed to prepare for all contingencies regarding the governor's project. Merit. I think they're planning something." Sleep eluded me that night. I arrived at Pinewood at 7:15 the next morning to find the parking lot already full. Through the conference room windows, I could see the entire design team gathered around the table, heads bent over documents. When I entered, conversation stopped abruptly. Spread across the table were copies of my design sketches, client notes, and plant lists, all taken from my files without permission. "Good morning," I said, surveying the scene. "Interesting reading material." Bryce cleared his throat. "We're preparing for the committee presentation. If Pinewood is selected to implement one of the finalist designs, we need to demonstrate our expertise in sustainable landscaping." "Using my work. Using company resources," Pierce corrected. "Everything you've created here belongs to Pinewood. Using company resources." Technically true, but the implications were clear. They planned to present my innovations, my techniques, and my expertise as collective company knowledge, with Pierce positioned as the sustainability expert. "I see," I said simply, taking a seat. Bryce outlined their strategy. Pierce would lead the presentation, showcasing Pinewood's approach to sustainable design. Truman and Lucinda would provide supporting examples of similar projects, my projects, rebranded under their names. I would attend but remain in a supporting role. "Questions?" Bryce asked when he finished. "Just one," I replied. "What time is the committee meeting?" 2:00. "We should arrive by 1:30 to set up." I nodded, making a mental note. The timing worked perfectly. "Now," Bryce continued, "we need to prepare responses to potential technical questions. Merit, the committee will likely ask about native plant selections and water conservation. We'll need you to brief Pierce on appropriate answers." For the next 2 hours, I answered their questions about ecological principles, soil biology, and water management systems. I explained the science behind my designs, watching as Pierce frantically took notes on concepts he'd previously dismissed as unnecessary complications. At 10:00, my phone buzzed with a calendar alert I'd set months ago. Native Plant Society grant application deadline. "I need to step out," I announced, standing. "I promised Mrs. Hawthorne I'd help her select plants for her butterfly garden this morning." "This meeting takes priority," Bryce insisted. "Mrs. Hawthorne is your biggest client," I reminded him. "Her gardening group brings in thousands in annual revenue. I'll be back in an hour." Before he could protest further, I walked out, leaving them surrounded by my copied designs. Instead of helping Mrs. Hawthorne, who had no appointment, I drove to the coffee shop 3 blocks away and opened my laptop. The grant application had been on my radar for months, funding for an independent project promoting native plant education. I'd started the application but abandoned it, believing my future remained at Pinewood. Now, I completed it with renewed purpose, outlining my vision for community workshops and demonstration gardens independent of corporate interests. After submitting the application, I composed a brief professional email to Amara Reed. "Thank you for your interest in sustainable landscape design. I'm writing to express my interest in discussing potential opportunities with the State Environmental Commission, regardless of the Governor's Mansion Initiative outcome. My commitment to ecological landscaping extends beyond my current position, and I would welcome a conversation about how my expertise might serve broader community needs." I pressed send, then ordered another coffee, watching the clock. At 11:30, I returned to Pinewood, where the strategy meeting continued without interruption. Pierce had moved from taking notes to practicing his presentation, reading directly from my design philosophy statement while Bryce nodded approvingly. "Welcome back," Lucinda said with forced brightness. Pierce was just practicing his explanation of rainwater management systems. "So I hear," I replied, resuming my seat. "That particular explanation comes from my presentation at last year's Water Conservation Symposium." Pierce faltered, then continued reading my words as if they were his own. I said nothing further, letting the discomfort build in the room. At noon, Bryce called a lunch break. Be back by 12:45. We'll leave for the committee meeting at 1 sharp. As everyone filed out, Deb caught my eye and tilted her head toward the greenhouse. I followed her there, away from curious ears. They're stealing everything you've built, she whispered. 3 years of your work, and they're packaging it as a team effort with Pierce as the face. I'm aware. What are you going to do? I smiled, the calm in my chest surprising even me. I'm going to let them. What? After everything they've done? Sometimes the best response isn't confrontation, but allowing people to reveal themselves fully. Deb studied my face. You're planning something. I'm merely allowing events to unfold naturally. At 12:55, I returned to the conference room where the team was gathering their materials. Bryce looked up with visible relief. There you are. We were concerned you might be late. I wouldn't miss this opportunity, I assured him. As they packed up presentation boards and plant samples, my phone buzzed with a text from Imara. Committee convening early. Can you come now? I looked up at the busy team. I just remembered I left some important client files in my car. I'll meet you there. Before anyone could question me, I walked quickly to the parking lot, got in my car, and drove directly to the state capitol building. The security guard checked my ID and directed me to the Environmental Commission offices on the 3rd floor. Imara met me in the reception area, professional but with a warmth in her eyes. Thank you for coming early. The committee has some specific questions before making their final decision. She led me to a conference room where 7 people sat around a polished table. In the center lay 3 landscape designs, including mine. Committee members, this is Merritt Bloom, currently with Pinewood Garden Center. I shook hands with each person as Imara introduced them. The governor's chief of staff, the state botanist, 2 landscape architecture professors, the Capitol grounds supervisor, and a prominent environmental advocate. The chief of staff spoke first. Miss Bloom, we're impressed with Design 347. The integration of ecological principles with aesthetic considerations shows remarkable sophistication. Thank you, I said simply. A moment of silence followed before the state botanist leaned forward. Are you acknowledging this is your design? The directness of the question caught me off guard. I glanced at Imara, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, I confirmed. I created Design 347. Interesting, the chief of staff said. Because we received a call this morning from Bryce Pinewood claiming that his design team, led by Pierce Pinewood, created this submission. He specifically mentioned it was a collaborative effort with Pierce as the primary designer. My breath caught. They had gone further than I anticipated, not just stealing my ideas, but actively claiming credit for my anonymous submission. That is categorically false, I stated. I created this design independently, outside of work hours, using my personal resources. No one at Pinewood has seen this design. Can you prove that? One of the professors asked. I opened my laptop and pulled up my personal cloud drive. These are my original sketches, dated 3 weeks before the submission deadline. You'll notice they include personal notes about plant selections based on visits to local natural areas. I can also show you the evolution of the design through multiple iterations. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through my design process, explaining ecological considerations and answering technical questions. The more I spoke, the more animated the committee members became, asking deeper questions about soil biology, water management, and native plant communities. One last question, the environmental advocate said. Why did you submit anonymously rather than through Pinewood? I took a deep breath, because I knew my design wouldn't be supported by my employer. Pinewood Garden Center presents itself as forward-thinking, but in practice, it resists truly sustainable approaches that might reduce chemical sales or maintenance contracts. That's a serious allegation, the chief of staff noted. It's my lived experience over 3 years, I replied. I've been denied promotion 3 times despite bringing in significant new business. My demonstration gardens are relegated to low-visibility areas. My workshop materials regularly disappear before classes. When I succeed despite these obstacles, others are given credit for my work. As I finished speaking, the door opened. Bryce, Pierce, and the rest of the Pinewood team filed in, surprise registering on their faces when they saw me already seated with the committee. Mr. Pinewood, Imara said coolly, thank you for joining us. We were just discussing Design 347 with its creator. Bryce paled visibly. Pierce stepped forward, portfolio in hand. There seems to be some confusion. As I was about to present, Our team at Pinewood developed that design collaboratively. With my direction, the state botanist raised an eyebrow. That's interesting, because Miss Bloom has just shown us her original sketches and development process. Perhaps you could show us yours? Pierce opened his portfolio, revealing the photocopied pages of my client notes and design sketches, none related to the governor's mansion design. These are supporting materials, he stammered. The actual design submission was a team effort. Mr. Pinewood, Imara said firmly. This committee selected finalists through an anonymous process specifically to judge designs on merit alone. We've verified Miss Bloom as the creator of Design 347, which has been selected as our winner. The committee has also voted unanimously to offer her the implementation contract and the position of State Sustainability Director. The room fell silent. Bryce's face flushed deep red while Pierce stared at me with undisguised hatred. Furthermore, Imara continued, given the apparent attempt to misrepresent authorship of this submission, the committee has decided that Pinewood Garden Center will not be considered as the implementation contractor. Miss Bloom will have full authority to select her own implementation team. This is outrageous, Bryce sputtered. Merit is our employee. Her work belongs to Pinewood. Actually, I interjected calmly, the contest rules specifically stated that submissions must be original work, not created as work for hire. I designed this on my own time, using my own resources. Nothing in my employment contract prevents me from pursuing independent projects outside of work hours. The chief of staff stood. Congratulations, Miss Bloom. The governor looks forward to working with you on transforming the mansion grounds, and eventually, all state properties, into showcases of sustainable landscaping. 2 weeks later, I stood on the mansion lawn, supervising the first native plant installations. My team, including Deb, who had eagerly accepted my job offer, worked efficiently around me. In the distance, a news crew interviewed the governor about the innovative ecological approach to the mansion renovation. My phone buzzed with a text from Imara. Local news reporting Pinewood Garden Center filing for restructuring. Apparently, their 3 largest commercial clients have terminated contracts. Something about seeking more forward-thinking landscape services. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and knelt to check the soil moisture around a newly planted serviceberry. The garden was coming to life exactly as I had envisioned it, a living ecosystem that would inspire change throughout the state. As visitors gathered for the first public tour of the renovation, I stood to address them, catching sight of Pierce watching from the sidelines, jobless and fuming. Welcome to the governor's Sustainable Landscape Initiative, I began. Today marks the beginning of a new approach to public spaces, one that works with nature rather than against it. Just like these native plants, good ideas need the right environment to flourish. Sometimes that means finding a new place to put down roots. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Have you ever had to leave a situation to find the recognition you deserved? Share your experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found your own path to success despite the obstacles. Junior staff eats in the break room. Camille announced loudly enough for the entire reception area to hear. Her hand clamped around my wrist as I reached for a bacon-wrapped date from the silver tray. She yanked me back just as Blake Newman, the CEO whose 8-figure contract I'd spent 6 months securing, turned toward me with recognition dawning in his eyes. But she was just explaining her strategy for, Blake began. Company policy, Camille cut him off with practiced charm. I'm sure you understand the importance of hierarchy during these functions. Our executives will walk you through everything. I stood frozen as Camille's fingernails dug crescents into my skin. The crystal chandeliers threw diamonds of light across the meticulously arranged dining room, the room I had personally selected for tonight's celebration. The centerpieces I'd designed, the menu I'd curated specifically to Blake's preferences after weeks of research. The break room is that way, Camille whispered, her breath hot against my ear. There's leftover pizza in the fridge. Try not to make a mess. She released me with a subtle push. Every eye in the room followed my humiliation, some with pity, others with quiet satisfaction. My boss Dom stood at the head table, raising his glass in a toast, as if I didn't exist, as if my name wasn't on every slide of the presentation he was about to take credit for. The break room door closed behind me with a soft click. Through the small window, I watched them settle into their seats, and 23 executives about to feast on my success. My reflection stared back at me, hair carefully styled, dress purchased specifically for tonight, eyes hollow with disbelief. 6 years of working until midnight. 6 years of brilliant ideas whispered to Dom in private, only to hear him announce them in meetings as his own. 6 years of being the invisible architect behind every major account. I slid down against the wall, phone clutched in my palm. I'd promised myself I would never make this call, that I would earn my place on merit alone. My thumb hovered over the contact simply labeled G. Beyond the door, I heard Dom's voice rising. Revolutionary approach that came to me during my vacation in. I pressed the button. She answered on the second ring. Tess? It's been too long. Her voice carried the weight of old money and older power. I need that favor, I whispered. Tonight. 20 minutes later, I stood before the bathroom mirror, splashing cold water on my face. My hands trembled. What had I done? What would happen when the break room door swung open? There you are. Dom's voice boomed with false cheer. We've been looking everywhere for you. His smile didn't match the panic in his eyes. Something wrong? I asked, drying my hands slowly. There's been a development. You're needed at the table. Immediately. Before I could respond, he grabbed my elbow, steering me through the corridor with bruising urgency. Listen carefully, he hissed. Geneva Harrington just arrived, unannounced, claims she's the majority shareholder behind Newman Enterprises and wants to meet the brilliant mind behind the campaign. Blake seems terrified of her. Whatever you do, don't. We rounded the corner to the dining room, and he fell silent. She stood at the center of the room, commanding attention in a tailored burgundy suit that cost more than my yearly salary. Silver hair cut in a sharp bob that framed piercing eyes currently fixed on the entrance. On me. Tess, Geneva's voice cut through the hushed room. There you are. Every head turned. Camille's face drained of color. You know her? Dom whispered, fingers digging into my arm. Before I could answer, Geneva crossed the room, her heels clicking a death march against the hardwood floor. I was just telling everyone how disappointed I am, she said loud enough for all to hear, that my goddaughter wasn't seated at the main table. The silence in the room became a living thing. Goddaughter? Dom's voice cracked. Did I stutter? Geneva's smile was a weapon. Now, who decided that the architect of this entire partnership should eat pizza in a break room while others take credit for her work? If you're feeling the tension building in this room, imagine living it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation where someone tried to erase your contributions? Like and subscribe to hear how this confrontation unfolds, because trust me, what happens next changed the trajectory of my entire career. My name is Tess Whitley. I'm 32 years old, and until that night, I'd built my career on being indispensable yet invisible. The reliable genius behind every successful campaign who somehow never appeared in the victory photos. I grew up with Geneva Harrington as a distant but watchful presence in my life. My mother had been her executive assistant before cancer took her when I was 11. Geneva had paid for my education but insisted I make my own way professionally. The world respects what is earned, not what is given, she always said. So I never used her name, never dropped hints about my connection to one of the wealthiest women in the country. I wanted to rise on merit alone. My first position at Landmark Promotions seemed perfect, a boutique agency with big dreams. Dom Petrova hired me as a junior strategist, impressed by my portfolio. For the first year, we worked well together. He recognized my ideas, gave appropriate credit. Then Landmark landed its first major client. During the pitch meeting, I watched Dom present my overnight work as his morning inspiration. The client loved it. Dom received a bonus. I received a mug that said, Team Player. The pattern continued. I'd develop innovative campaigns. Dom would tweak one minor detail and claim ownership. When I confronted him privately, his response cut deep. Ideas need a face people trust. Yours isn't it. Be grateful I bring your concepts to life. I considered leaving, but every promising interview ended when potential employers called Landmark for references. Somehow, those opportunities evaporated. I later learned Dom told companies I was creative but unreliable, ensuring I remained under his thumb. Then came the Newman account. Blake Newman had built a tech empire from nothing and needed a complete brand overhaul before taking his company public. Every agency in the city wanted this contract. Dom assigned me to background research, nothing more. But I saw something in Newman's trajectory others missed. While the creative team developed sleek, modern concepts, I secretly built an alternative campaign centered on Newman's humble beginnings, the human story behind the technology. The night before the pitch, Dom rejected all the official concepts. In desperation, He discovered my hidden files. This might work, he muttered, scrolling through my presentation. Why didn't you bring this to me earlier? I tried, I reminded him, 3 times. The next day, I watched from the back of the room as Dom presented my work with such conviction, you'd think he'd birthed every slide personally. Blake Newman leaned forward, captivated. When he signed the contract, triple the size of any previous Landmark client, he shook Dom's hand and said, "You really understood me, not just my company." The celebration dinner was planned for 6 months later, after the successful launch of Newman's rebranded empire. I had assumed my invitation was assured. I had managed every detail of the campaign implementation, often working until dawn. Blake knew my name from countless emails and calls, yet here I stood in the dining room, watching Camille's face transition from shock to calculation as Geneva's words hung in the air. There must be some misunderstanding, Camille recovered quickly. We rotate staff at these functions. Next time, rotate? Geneva cut her off. Like furniture? How fascinating. Her gaze swept the room before landing on Blake Newman. Blake, did you know that the campaign concept you praised Dom for was actually created by Tess? That the personal touches you appreciated so much came from her understanding of your journey, not his? Blake's expression darkened. Is that true? Dom stepped forward. We all contributed. In a team environment, show him, Geneva said to me. Show him your original notes. My phone felt heavy in my hand. I have them here, from 6 months ago, with timestamps. The room grew impossibly quiet as I pulled up the files and handed my phone to Blake. As he scrolled, his jaw tightened. These are dated weeks before our first meeting, he said finally, and they're identical to what was presented, down to the tagline. Dom laughed nervously. Tess is an essential team member. That's why we value her so much. Perhaps there's been a... Stop talking. Blake's voice cut like glass. He turned to Geneva. I presume this dinner was meant to discuss our next steps? She nodded once. Then I'd like to have that conversation with the person who actually understood my vision, not someone who stole it. His eyes found mine. Tess, would you join me at the table? Dom's hand gripped my shoulder. As her superior, you should probably start updating your resume, Geneva suggested pleasantly. Because after tonight, I suspect your services won't be required at Landmark, or anywhere my influence reaches. The blood drained from Dom's face. Camille stepped forward, survival instinct kicking in. This is highly inappropriate. I'm the event coordinator, and I'm still waiting to understand why my goddaughter was directed to eat cold pizza while watching through a window as others celebrated her achievement, Geneva interrupted. Perhaps you can explain that to me. In the break room, Camille's mouth opened and closed, no sound emerging. A server appeared, pulling out the chair at the head of the table, for me. As I moved to take my seat, Dom blocked my path. You planned this, he hissed. You've just ruined years of relationships. No, I whispered back. You did that yourself, one stolen idea at a time. The entire room watched as I sat down beside Blake Newman and Geneva. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain everyone could hear it. 6 years of invisibility crystallized into this moment of terrifying visibility. Blake leaned toward me. I want to hear the whole campaign again, from the actual source. I took a deep breath and began to speak. Across the room, through the break room window, I could see Dom and Camille watching. For the first time, they were the ones looking in from the outside. But this was just the beginning. What happened after dinner would transform not just my career, but the entire power structure of Landmark Promotions. And Dom hadn't even begun to understand what my phone call had set in motion. The dinner progressed like a perfectly choreographed dance of power shifts. With every question Blake asked, with every answer I provided, Dom's face grew paler across the room. Through the break room window, I watched him frantically texting, his thumb jabbing at his phone like he could stab his way out of this nightmare. The insight about connecting your childhood innovation lab to the company's founding story, that was brilliant, Blake said, cutting into his steak. It made the technology feel human. That came from reading about how you built your first prototype in your grandmother's garage, I replied. Most tech companies hide their messy beginnings. Yours needed to be celebrated. Geneva sipped her wine, watching me with quiet approval. Tell them about the logo redesign. For the next hour, I walked through every element of the campaign. The senior vice presidents who had ignored me for months now leaned forward, hanging on my words. The creative directors who had rejected my ideas repeatedly now nodded along as if they'd supported me all along. When dessert arrived, Blake set down his spoon and turned to face me directly. I have a confession, he said. I almost pulled the contract 3 weeks ago. A collective intake of breath circled the table. The implementation wasn't matching what had been promised. The emails I received from Dom lacked the understanding I'd experienced in our initial meetings. Blake glanced toward the break room. Then someone named Tess started copying herself on all communications, providing additional context, sending midnight clarifications. Suddenly, everything aligned again. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. I made a call to my private investigator, asked him to find out who was really driving this partnership. My throat went dry. He discovered something interesting. Blake turned the card over. On the back, in handwritten notes, Tess Whitley, real architect. Senior team takes credit. Pattern established. You knew? I whispered. For weeks, Blake smiled. I was planning to request you personally manage our account moving forward. I just didn't realize I'd be making that request during such theatrical circumstances. Geneva laughed. Theatrical is my specialty. The company president, Alan Ward, who had remained strategically silent throughout dinner, finally cleared his throat. Miss Whitley, perhaps we should discuss your position at Landmark first thing tomorrow morning. Why wait? Geneva countered. I find that important business decisions are best made while the situation remains fresh. Alan loosened his collar. Of course, Tess, effective immediately. You'll be promoted to Executive Creative Director, Geneva suggested, with the Newman account under her exclusive management. Alan nodded too quickly. Exactly what I was thinking. And compensation adjustment retroactive to the beginning of the Newman project, Blake added, to reflect her actual contributions. I sat stunned as they negotiated my future across dessert plates. 6 years of invisibility transformed in a single evening. When dinner concluded, Blake shook my hand firmly. I look forward to working directly with you from now on. He lowered his voice. And I admire your restraint. In your position, I might have done something far less civilized than making a phone call. If only he knew what I had planned. Geneva walked me to her waiting car, her driver holding the door. You should have called me sooner, she said. I wanted to succeed on my own terms. And how did that work out for you? Her eyebrow arched. Sometimes power needs to recognize power, Tess. False humility serves no one. I glanced back at the restaurant. Through the window, I could see Dom and Camille still sitting in the break room, their faces locked in silent argument. What happens to them now? I asked. Geneva's smile turned sharp. That depends entirely on you. The next morning, I arrived at Landmark to discover my belongings had been moved overnight. Not to a cubicle with a window as I'd hoped for years, but to Dom's corner office. His name had already been removed from the door. My phone buzzed with messages from colleagues who had witnessed my humiliation the night before, now falling over themselves to congratulate me. The same people who had watched in silence for years as my ideas were stolen suddenly claimed they'd always known I was the real talent. I set my bag down on the massive desk and traced my fingers over the polished surface. Dom's family photo was gone, but the ghost of his presence remained. The office door opened without a knock. Camille stood there, clutching a tablet to her chest like armor. Alan wants to see you in the conference room, she said, her voice stripped of its usual authority. Everyone's waiting. Everyone? The entire creative team, and Dom. I followed her through the hallway, aware of eyes tracking my movement through glass partitions. Whispers trailed in my wake. The conference room door felt heavier than usual as I pushed it open. 14 faces turned toward me. At the head of the table sat Alan. To his right, Dom, his expression carved from stone. Tess. Alan gestured to the empty chair at the opposite end of the table. Or, should I say, Executive Creative Director Whitley. I took my seat, feeling the weight of expectation press against my shoulders. As you all know, last night revealed some organizational challenges. Alan chose his words carefully. In light of recent developments, we're implementing immediate changes to our leadership structure. Dom's knuckles whitened against the table edge. Tess will be taking over creative direction for the Newman account and all major client relationships moving forward. Alan continued. Dom will be transitioning to a new role as, this is absurd, Dom cut in. One dinner with her godmother, and suddenly she's qualified to lead? She's been here 6 years without a single promotion. Ask yourselves why. Silence stretched across the table. Because you blocked everyone, I said quietly. Because you took credit for my work while telling other companies I was unreliable when they tried to hire me. Dom's laugh held no humor. Paranoid as always. Maybe you weren't promoted because your ideas only work when refined by someone with actual experience. Is that why you presented my original Newman pitch without changes? I pulled out my phone. I recorded our meeting the night before the Newman presentation, when you found my backup concept and claimed it as your own. The blood drained from Dom's face. You what? After 3 years of watching you steal my work, I started documenting everything. I set my phone on the table. Every presentation you claimed as yours. Every email where you copied my language verbatim. Every meeting where you dismissed my ideas only to present them later as your own. Alan's expression hardened. Dom, is this true? She's manipulating the situation. Dom's voice rose. She makes minor contributions and expects full credit. Ask anyone on the team. All eyes turned to the creative team members, who suddenly found the table surface fascinating. Layla, I said gently to the youngest designer, who actually created the Newman logo that won the industry award last month? Layla glanced nervously at Dom before answering. I gave my concept to you, and you passed it to Dom for review. And what happened after that? She swallowed hard. Dom presented it as his design evolution of your original concept. Dom slammed his hand on the table. This is a coordinated attack. Yesterday, I'm the creative leader of this agency. Today, I'm being ambushed because her godmother happens to be Geneva Harrington? No, I corrected him. You're facing consequences because Blake Newman hired a private investigator who uncovered your pattern of theft weeks ago. Geneva just accelerated the timeline. The room fell silent. Dom's face cycled through shock, disbelief, and finally, calculation. Fine. He straightened his jacket. If that's how we're playing this, Alan, I quit, effective immediately. And I'm taking the Westbrook account with me. They're loyal to me personally. Alan's expression didn't change. Actually, they're not. Excuse me? Blake Newman called Westbrook's CEO this morning. Apparently, they play golf together. He shared some concerns about credit attribution at Landmark. Dom's confidence faltered. Westbrook has been my client for 4 years, and they've requested Tess take over their account immediately. Alan finished, along with 3 other clients who received similar calls. It seems Mr. Newman has been quite busy. The room spun around me. This wasn't part of my plan. I had expected to confront Dom myself, on my terms, not to have others fighting battles I had prepared for years to wage. Dom turned to me, hatred burning in his eyes. Congratulations. You've destroyed a decade of relationships in one night. Those relationships were built on my work, I replied evenly. The only thing I destroyed was the illusion that it was yours. He stood abruptly. You think this is over? That you can humiliate me and walk away? I built this place while you were fetching coffee. No, Dom. I built this place while you were taking credit. His smile turned cruel. We'll see how well you do without someone to polish your rough ideas. You may have the title now, but you lack what it takes to lead. Always have. He stormed out, leaving a vacuum of tension behind him. Alan cleared his throat. Well, that was. Let's take a short break before discussing transition plans. As the room emptied, Camille lingered behind, hovering near my chair. I want to apologize for last night, she said, her voice oddly soft. The seating arrangement wasn't my idea, Dom insisted. He said you'd understand it was just business. I studied her face, searching for sincerity and finding calculation instead. 6 years, Camille. You watched it happen for 6 years. She had the grace to look away. We all did what we needed to survive here. And now you're doing what you need to survive under new leadership. Her smile tightened. We're professionals. Adjusting to new circumstances is what we do. As she walked away, my phone buzzed with a text from Geneva. Phase 1 complete. Ready for Phase 2? I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. The rush of this morning's victory was already fading, leaving a hollow space where my anger had lived for years. Dom was gone, but the system that enabled him remained, filled with people who had watched my talent being stripped from me daily and said nothing. A promotion and corner office wouldn't erase those years. The real revenge I had planned went much deeper than professional humiliation. I typed back, tonight, 8 p.m., bring the documents. Because Dom had made one critical mistake in his years of theft, one that went far beyond stolen ideas and borrowed acclaim, one that would not only end his career but potentially send him to prison. And everyone who had enabled him was about to learn exactly what happened when you pushed the quiet one too far. Geneva's car idled outside my apartment building at exactly 8 p.m. I slid into the back seat beside her, my laptop bag heavy on my knees. Congratulations on your promotion, she said, handing me a glass of something amber from the built-in bar, though I suspect it feels hollow. It does. I took a sip, the liquid burning my throat. Everyone at the office is suddenly my best friend. People who never remembered my name are sending me lunch invitations. Geneva's laugh lacked warmth. Success attracts parasites. Speaking of which, have you heard from Dom? He cleaned out his office this afternoon, left his company phone and laptop. I stared out the window as the city blurred past. But he's been calling board members, telling them I manipulated the situation. And how is that working out for him? Mixed results. 3 directors believe him. 2 are waiting to see what happens next. Geneva nodded thoughtfully. And what is happening next, Tess? I opened my laptop. That depends on what you brought me. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a flash drive. Everything you requested. Bank statements, private emails, transaction records. My investigators are thorough. I plugged it into my laptop, scanning the files that appeared. My breath caught. It's worse than I thought. Much worse, Geneva confirmed. Dom wasn't just stealing your ideas. He was stealing from the company itself. The evidence laid bare on my screen told a damning story. For years, Dom had been running a scheme where he created phantom vendor accounts for Landmark's projects. He'd submit inflated invoices from these fake companies for consulting services that were never performed, then approve the payments himself as creative director. The money flowed directly to accounts he controlled. Most disturbing were the emails showing he'd specifically targeted projects I'd developed, using my concepts not just for professional advancement but for financial fraud. How much? I asked quietly. Nearly $2 million over 5 years, Geneva replied, carefully spread across dozens of accounts. He was clever about it. Not clever enough, I murmured, scrolling through the evidence. Does the board know? Not yet. I thought you should decide how this information comes to light. I closed my laptop. I need to think about this carefully. Don't wait too long, Geneva cautioned. My source says Dom has a meeting tomorrow with Landmark's biggest competitor. He's planning to bring client information with him. The car pulled up to a restaurant I didn't recognize. A discreet establishment with no sign, just a single blue door on a quiet street. I thought we could discuss strategy over dinner, Geneva explained as the driver opened our door. Someone is expecting us. Inside, the restaurant was nearly empty, with only a few tables occupied by people who looked important enough not to acknowledge others. In the back corner, a solitary figure waited. Blake? I said in surprise as we approached. Blake Newman stood, shaking my hand. Tess, glad you could make it. You two know each other beyond business? I asked, looking between him and Geneva. Old friends, Geneva explained as we sat. We serve on several boards together, including one that might interest you, Blake added. The Investor Alliance for Ethical Business. Blake added. I felt a strange sense of manipulation settling over me. Is that why you hired a private investigator to look into Dom, because Geneva asked you to? Quite the opposite, Blake said. I hired the investigator because something felt off about how Landmark operated. When my investigator mentioned your name repeatedly as the uncredited source of the work I admired, I called Geneva to ask if she knew you. Imagine my surprise, Geneva said dryly, discovering my goddaughter was the same Tess my friend couldn't stop talking about. So last night wasn't just about my promotion, I realized. You were gathering evidence. The promotion was deserved, Blake said firmly. But yes, we needed to create a situation where Dom would reveal himself. And he performed beautifully, Geneva added. His outburst this morning, his threats, his attempts to contact clients, all documented by people we trust. I felt anger building in my chest. So, I was bait? All of this was orchestrated without my knowledge? No, Tess, Geneva countered. You were the catalyst. The phone call was your choice. What followed was opportunity. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, suddenly wary. Blake leaned forward. Landmark's board meets tomorrow at noon. Dom has requested time to present his side of the story. Claims of harassment, professional sabotage. That's absurd. It's predictable, Geneva corrected. Powerful people rarely accept accountability. They rewrite narratives where they're the victims. So what do I do? That, Geneva said, sliding a folder across the table, is entirely your decision, but we've prepared some options. Inside the folder was a detailed plan. Times, talking points, legal precedents, and a list of people who would support my version of events. The final page contained something unexpected, an offer letter. What is this? I asked, reading the company name. Visionary Partners. My new venture? Blake explained. A creative incubator for ethical innovation. The position is yours if you want it. Triple your current salary, full creative control, and proper credit for all your work. I stared at them both. You're offering me a way out. We're offering you choices. Geneva corrected. Stay at Landmark as their rising star. Leave for a guaranteed position with Blake. Or burn it all down, she said simply. Show the board what Dom has been doing with company funds while stealing your ideas. The evidence on that drive is enough for criminal charges. The restaurant seemed to fade around me as I considered my options. The easy path beckoned. Take Blake's offer. Walk away from Landmark. Start fresh. But something in me resisted. If I expose Dom, I said slowly, what happens to Landmark? Their reputation takes a hit, Blake admitted. But firms survive scandals every day. And the people who watched it happen? Who benefited from my work being stolen? Geneva's expression softened slightly. This isn't just about justice for you anymore, is it? It never was, I realized. It's about a system that rewards theft and punishes those who create. The next morning, I arrived at Landmark's offices an hour before the board meeting. The weekend cleaning crew had left Dom's former office spotless, erasing the last physical traces of his presence. I set up my laptop and waited. Board members began filtering in around 11:30. Alan nodded nervously as he passed my open door. At 11:45, I gathered my materials and walked to the conference room. The tension was palpable as I entered. 8 board members sat in silent judgment, with Alan at the head of the table. Dom had arrived early and sat midway down, his expression confident. Beside him sat Camille and 2 senior directors who had benefited most from his stolen ideas. Tess, Alan gestured to an empty chair. We were just about to begin. Actually, I said, remaining standing, I'd like to address the board first, if that's acceptable. Dom smirked. Eager to defend yourself? I ignored him, focusing on the board members. Before Dom presents his version of events, I believe you should review some information that came into my possession. I distributed folders to each board member. These documents show a pattern of financial fraud committed over the past 5 years. Phantom vendors, fake invoices, money diverted to personal accounts. Dom's face drained of color. This is absurd. She's fabricating. The evidence has been verified by independent forensic accountants. I continued calmly. Bank records, email trails, your signature on every fraudulent approval. One board member looked up sharply. Is this accurate? We're talking about significant amounts. Almost $2 million, I confirmed. Dom stood, his chair scraping against the floor. This is a coordinated attack. First, she ambushes me with her godmother. Now these false accusations. The police have already been notified. I cut in. They're waiting downstairs with the company's outside counsel. The room erupted into chaos. Dom lunged toward me, but Alan stepped between us. Enough, Alan shouted. Dom, sit down. You can't possibly believe this. Dom appealed to the board. I built this company's creative reputation. With her work, a quiet voice said from the doorway. Every head turned to see Layla standing there, clutching a thumb drive. I have copies, she said, her voice trembling but determined, of original files, timestamps showing when Tess created concepts and when Dom modified them to present as his own. Going back 4 years, another designer appeared behind her, then another. Soon, 6 members of the creative team stood in solidarity. Dom's confident facade crumbled completely. This is a witch hunt. You're all ungrateful. The only thing we're guilty of, Layla interrupted, is staying silent too long. 2 security guards appeared in the doorway. Alan nodded toward Dom. Please escort Mr. Petrova to the lobby. Company counsel is waiting. As Dom was led away, shouting threats and accusations, I finally took my seat. The financial fraud is only part of this, I told the remaining board members. For years, Landmark has operated under a system that rewards idea theft and punishes innovation. It's not just Dom, it's cultural. I laid out my vision for restructuring the creative department, transparent attribution, collaborative workflows, proper credit for all team members. By the time I finished, the board was listening with genuine interest. You've given us a lot to consider, the chairwoman said finally, and saved the company from potentially devastating fraud charges. What do you want in return? I'm not staying, I said simply. Alan's head snapped up. But your promotion, I've accepted a position elsewhere, I explained. But before I go, I want to ensure the people who actually create the work this company profits from are properly recognized and compensated. I pushed a document across the table, a restructuring plan that promoted Layla and others who had been overlooked for years. This isn't negotiable. It's the price of my discretion about how long this fraud continued while the board remained oblivious. 3 hours later, I walked out of Landmark for the last time. The creative team gathered in the lobby, uncertain but hopeful about their futures under new leadership. Layla hugged me tightly. I can't believe you're leaving after fighting so hard. Some places can't be fixed from within, I told her, but I'll be watching to make sure they keep their promises to all of you. Outside, Geneva's car waited at the curb. It's done? She asked as I slid into the back seat. Not exactly as planned, I admitted, but better. How so? Dom's facing charges. The board is restructuring the creative department based on my recommendations. And instead of taking Blake's offer, I smiled. I'm starting my own agency, with Landmark's blessing, and 3 of their former clients as my first accounts. Geneva's eyebrow raised. That wasn't one of the options we discussed. I'm tired of other people determining my options. I watched the Landmark building recede in the rear window. The best revenge isn't just exposing theft or punishing the guilty. It's creating something new that wouldn't exist without you. 6 months later, my new agency occupied a modest office downtown. Our staff numbered only 12, but our reputation for transparent creative attribution attracted both clients and talent. On my wall hung a framed news article about Dom's indictment and Landmark's subsequent creative renaissance under Layla's leadership. Blake Newman remained our biggest client. Geneva, to my surprise, became a silent partner. And every employee contract included what we called the Whitley Clause, guaranteeing proper credit for all creative work, regardless of title or tenure. The true revenge wasn't the public humiliation of that dinner, or even Dom's criminal charges. It was creating a place where talent couldn't be stolen, where ideas belonged to their creators, and where the quiet ones never had to make desperate phone calls to be seen. If you've ever had your work stolen or been pushed aside while others took credit for your contributions, remember this. Your revenge doesn't have to be destruction. Sometimes, the most powerful response is to build something better, something that wouldn't exist without you. Leave a comment sharing your story, and subscribe to hear more about navigating workplace injustice with integrity. The best comeback isn't just surviving, it's thriving on your own terms.